Okay, welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we are embarking on a seriously fascinating thought experiment. In this explainer, we're going to literally peel back the layers of the human mind to see what lies at the absolute center. If you've ever paused and wondered what makes you, well, you, and more importantly, what makes you aware, you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to imagine a wild scenario. You wake up, but you have absolutely zero memories of who you are. No personal history, no sense of having a physical body, and totally no sense of time passing. And no, this isn't just because you haven't had your morning coffee yet. You're just suspended. So the big question is, are you still conscious? Like, what exactly is left when the whole shebang, everything you know about yourself, everything that makes up your identity, is completely stripped away? Is it just a dark void, or is the light of awareness still on? Well, to answer that, we're drawing on some truly incredible research by independent researcher John Cantillo. His work explores this really counterintuitive idea. The self isn't just one solid, unified thing. We walk around feeling like a single, cohesive I, but that's actually kind of an illusion. Cantillo points out that just because the self might disappear or, change dramatically, it definitely doesn't mean consciousness itself disappears. Basically, the persistence of awareness doesn't require the persistence of any single idea of selfhood. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to break the self down into its component parts. Let's compare two distinct layers of selfhood. On one side, we've got the narrative self. Think of this as your personal history, your memories, your name, and your hopes for the future. On the other side, there's the egoic self. This is your sense of agency, your feeling of owning a physical body, and those perceived boundaries that separate you from your environment. So they're related, for sure, but they are absolutely not the same thing. And hey, this isn't just a purely theoretical exercise, because science actually provides us with real conditions where these familiar forms of selfhood start to diminish or just dissolve entirely. We call these the boundary cases of the human mind. Think about dreaming or deep contemplative absorption, like intense meditation, psychedelic states, anesthesia awareness, and other extraordinary conscious reports. In these states, the narrative self or the egoic self can completely drop away. And when we actually look at the reports from subjects who experience these boundary states, we find something truly remarkable. They often report losing their narrative identity or their sense of agency completely. They literally don't know who they are, but crucially, they do not report an absence of consciousness itself. As this quote perfectly captures, subjects will say things like, "There was awareness without identity. The whole story of me was gone, but the awareness, it stuck around." And this brilliantly illustrates the next stage of our thought experiment. In some of these profound states, even the egoic self completely vanishes. The boundary between the person experiencing the world and the world itself just dissolves. Subjects report that there was no distinction between the observer and the observed. But again, and this is the fascinating part, right? They are still reporting an experience. Even without a self-world boundary, the lights are still on. Experience is definitely still happening. Which brings us to the hero of our story, a provisional concept Cantillo introduces called experiential presence. I absolutely love this term because it's just beautifully precise. Experiential presence is purely a descriptive concept. It's not some mystical soul, it's not a hidden observer, and it's definitely not a supernatural entity. It's simply the minimal fact that experience appears present at all, even when all the ordinary forms of selfhood, identity, and bodily boundaries are completely missing. It is the absolute bare minimum of awareness. So, if experiential presence is the one thing that seems to stick around when literally everything else falls away, we have to ask why? How is that even possible? Well, Cantefelo's paper evaluates four competing explanations for why this core of experiential presence seems to persist across so many wildly different altered conscious states. So the crucial point is how we map out these academic theories cleanly. This overview gives us a really great bird's eye view of four wildly different approaches, ranging from tricks of human language to fundamental properties of the universe. Let's briefly break each of these down so you can see exactly how scientists and philosophers are wrestling with this mystery. All right, the first theory is the reconstruction hypothesis. This one is the most conservative explanation. It essentially suggests that experiential presence might actually just be an illusion created by human language. Think about it. When you wake up from a deep, selfless state, you still have to use language to describe it to someone. You're forced to say, "I experienced," because, well, that's just how grammar works. This hypothesis argues that we reconstruct the presence after the fact, simply because our language demands a subject. Moving on, the second theory is the neural invariance hypothesis. This one is heavily grounded in contemporary neuroscience. The big idea here is that even when a psychedelic drug or deep meditation radically alters the contents of your mind, the specific underlying brain architectures responsible for conscious subjectivity just remain intact. Think of it kind of like a computer. The physical, biological machinery keeping the lights on is stable and running perfectly fine, even if the software running your narrative identity has temporarily crashed. Then we have the third theory, the organizational invariance hypothesis. This one's a bit more abstract, but it's super compelling. It suggests that experiential presence is like a higher order pattern in a complex system. It's like, well, just like a wave in the ocean retains its overall shape even as the individual water molecules inside it are constantly swapping out and changing. Experiential presence stays stable even when the physical or cognitive components underneath it are wildly rearranged by altered states. Finally, we reach the fourth, and honestly, the most radical theory, the phenomenological necessity hypothesis. This theory proposes that experiential presence isn't just a feature or a byproduct of consciousness. It is the mandatory absolute minimum condition for an experience to happen at all. If experiential presence isn't there, you don't just have a different kind of consciousness, you literally have no consciousness. It's essentially the blank canvas required for any paint to be applied whatsoever. To test that radical fourth theory, Cantillot invites us into another thought experiment. I want you to try this. Can you actually describe an experience that completely lacks experiential presence? Try to imagine it. The problem is, as researchers, we rely entirely on first-person reports to gather scientific evidence about the mind. Someone has to actually tell us what they experienced. But how on earth do you report on an experience where the very fact of experiencing was absent? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it highlights the limits of our language and reporting. Compare these two types of reports. An intelligible report says, there is awareness without identity. We can totally grasp that. It makes sense. But a conceptually unstable report tries to say, there was consciousness, but nothing was experienced. The exact moment you try to communicate the total absence of experiential presence, the sentence just collapses into nonsense. It essentially becomes a description of being unconscious. Which brings us to a massive methodological hurdle in this whole area of study, the epistemological paradox. This is the problem of self-characterization. Because all evidence about consciousness comes from conscious subjects, our methods are structurally biased to detect presence. We are essentially using our own experiential presence to look for our experiential presence. Actually, scratch that. It's more like trying to bite your own teeth. It's an incredible loop that makes studying the core of consciousness unlike studying literally anything else in the natural sciences. I really want you to take a moment to absorb this quote from the source material. Consciousness functions not only as an object of inquiry, but also as the medium through which inquiry occurs. Wow. That is absolutely awe-inspiring. Think about it. If you study physics or biology or chemistry, you're a conscious observer looking at inanimate objects or distinct biological systems. But in consciousness research, the tool you use to look through the microscope is the microscope itself. Which leaves us with this final, profound question to ponder. What must consciousness possess to be an experience at all? And what does that reveal about its capacity to know itself? We've stripped away memories, the physical body, the ego, and even the boundary between self and the world, leaving only this raw, unfiltered experiential presence. Whether it's just a trick of language, a neural network firing, or a fundamental property of the universe, it defines our waking reality. I really hope this explainer has left you questioning the very nature of your own awareness right now. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the deepest layers of the human mind.